All right, today we're jumping into the life of a truly fascinating and, well, pretty contradictory figure, Sir Francis Bacon. Now, this is a guy who was a total giant in his time. On one hand, he was a powerful statesman who climbed all the way to the top in England, but on the other hand, he was this revolutionary philosopher who basically wanted to hit the reset button on all of human knowledge and start completely fresh.
So here's how we're going to break it down. We're going to look at his life on two parallel tracks. First, we'll cover his dramatic political career, the rise and the spectacular fall. And then we'll dive into his massive philosophical project, his plan to completely reshape science for the modern age.
So let's start with the real tension at the heart of Bacon's life, this constant pull between his hunger for political power and his equally huge ambition to reinvent human thought itself.
He was really living two lives at once. You had the political operator, the sharp lawyer, the member of parliament, who eventually becomes Lord Chancellor, the most powerful man in the country. And then you had the philosophical visionary, the guy who was championing this brand new idea of science, a science for the use and benefit of men.
And talk about ambition. I mean, this is just incredible. As a young man, he writes this in a letter to his uncle. I have taken all knowledge to be my province. Think about that. He's basically saying, yeah, I'm going to master and reorganize everything. It's a goal that would drive him for the rest of his life.
For years, Bacon kind of struggled to get ahead under Queen Elizabeth I, but then King James I comes to the throne, and for Bacon, it's like all the doors to power just flew open at once.
And just look at how fast this happened. I mean, we're talking about an incredibly rapid climb. He gets knighted in 1603, and by 1618, that's only 15 years, he's the Lord Chancellor. This is a level of power he could have only dreamed about when he was just starting out.
But you know how these stories go. Just when Bacon is at the absolute peak, the very summit of his power, his whole world just implodes with, honestly, breathtaking speed.
Right at the pinnacle of his career, he gets hit with charges of bribery, basically accepting gifts from people whose cases were before his court. Now look, this was a super common practice back then, even though it was illegal. But for Bacon, the charge stuck, and it changed everything.
He pled guilty, and yeah, the huge fine was eventually dropped, and he only spent like 4 days in the Tower of London. But the real punishment, the one that stung, was the last one. He was banned from politics for life. His career as a statesman was over. The public disgrace was total.
And here's the great irony of his life. This public ruin, it became what's called a fortunate fall. Because once he was kicked out of politics, he was finally free. For the last 5 years of his life, he could pour all of his energy into the philosophical mission he'd set for himself decades before.
So in these final years, Bacon goes all in on his masterpiece, the Magna Instauration, or the Great Instauration. And this wasn't just another book. No, this was his grand 6-part plan to tear down the old ways of thinking and build a completely new foundation for science. He called it the Grand Edifice. The entire point was to shift learning away from, abstract arguments and towards creating practical knowledge, real discoveries that could actually make life better for people. The most famous piece of this whole project was his book, The Novum Organum, The New Instrument. And the cover page had this amazing image, a ship sailing out past the Pillars of Hercules, which for the ancient world was literally the edge of the map. The message couldn't be clearer. It's time to stop rereading Aristotle and start sailing into the unknown.
So what was the problem he was trying to solve? Well, Bacon said learning had gotten sick with 3 distempers. First, you had fantastical learning. Think astrology, alchemy, stuff like that. Then there was contentious learning, basically scholars arguing in circles for centuries about tiny details. And finally, delicate learning, the humanists who, in Bacon's view, cared more about sounding elegant than discovering truth. He saw it all as a massive waste of brain power.
Now, this next part is absolutely crucial. Bacon said before we can even begin to learn properly, we have to clean house in our own minds. We have to face these 4 idols that distort how we see the world. There are the idols of the tribe, our basic human flaws like seeing patterns that aren't there, the idols of the cave, our own personal biases, the idols of the marketplace, how language itself can confuse us, and the idols of the theater, the flawed philosophical systems we inherit. Get rid of those, he said, and then you can start seeing clearly.
So what's his solution? A new method, induction. Instead of the old way, the Aristotelian way, where you take a few examples and then leap to some huge theory, Bacon said, no, you have to go slow.
You painstakingly gather data, you confirm small truths, and you slowly, carefully climb a ladder of intellect toward bigger, more general conclusions. It's methodical.
But, not everyone was sold on his method. William Harvey, the guy who actually discovered how blood circulates, had this famous line where he joked that Bacon wrote about science like a Lord Chancellor, meaning he wrote like a politician making laws, not like a scientist actually doing the messy work. Harvey and others were already using hypotheses and big, creative leaps, stuff that didn't quite fit into Bacon's rigid, step-by-step plan.
Bacon saw himself as a trumpeter, just announcing the dawn of a new age of science. But now, centuries later, what do we make of him? His legacy is, well, it's complicated. At its heart, his most powerful, world-changing idea was this: knowledge is power. Not just power to know things, but power to do things, power to be used for the good of humanity, for what he called the relief of man's estate. And that idea, right there, became a pillar of the modern world.
And this really gets at the debate that still rages around him today. Is he a hero or a villain? For some, he's a Promethean culture hero who gave us this amazing idea of science working for all of us. But for others, he's the arch-villain who set humanity on a path to dominate and exploit nature, leading to all sorts of disasters.
In the end, maybe the best way to think of him is as a colossus with feet of clay. He was this immense, powerful figure whose ideas truly shaped our world. But he was also deeply flawed, a man whose own ambition was both his greatest strength and the cause of his downfall.
And that leaves us with a huge question, one that's more relevant today than ever. Bacon wanted science to relieve human suffering. And it has. It's given us medicine, technology, things he couldn't have imagined. But has it come at a price? So after 400 years, is his vision a blueprint we should keep following? Or is it a warning we should finally start to heed? That's the legacy we're all still wrestling with.